This is Middle East Brief with Avi Kaner, your daily intelligence update on what actually matters.
Yesterday, the United States House of Representatives voted on an amendment that would have eliminated American security assistance to its ally Israel. The amendment failed, and it failed decisively. 314 members voted no. 104 voted yes. At first glance, the result appears reassuring. Nearly 3/4 of the members casting a yes or no vote rejected the amendment. American assistance to Israel remains intact. But the most important story is not that the amendment failed. It is that 104 members of Congress voted for it, and of those 104 votes, 103 of them were Democrats. More than half of the House Democrats casting a yes or no vote voted against Israel and severing American assistance to Israel. That should get everyone's attention. Not because the amendment came close to passing, it did not, but because it revealed how dramatically the political conversation surrounding Israel has changed. For decades, support for Israel was one of the few genuinely bipartisan issues in Washington. Republican presidents, Democratic presidents, Republican, Democratic congressional leaders all supported Israel, and assistance passed by overwhelming margins all the time. The parties, of course, disagreed over Israeli government policies, settlements, negotiations, military operations, and of course, relations with the Palestinians. But one principle remained remarkably durable: America's commitment to Israel's security. That consensus survived the Cold War, it survived the Oslo process, the Second Intifada, the wars against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and repeated conflicts with Hamas, and years of confrontation with the Iranian regime. Even after October 7, in 2023, Congress approved billions of dollars in emergency assistance following the Hamas massacres. So what has changed? Part of the answer is generational. Many younger Americans view Israel very differently from their parents and grandparents. Previous generations remembered vividly Israel's founding. They saw the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War. They celebrated the raid of Entebbe. And then they witnessed the suicide bombings of the Second Intifada, and decades in which neighboring governments and terrorist organizations openly sought Israel's destruction. But many younger Americans have encountered the conflict very differently, primarily through the wars in Gaza. Their understanding is often shaped not by history books or long-form reporting, but by social media. A photograph, a 15-second video, a slogan, an accusation repeated thousands and thousands of times before its context can catch up. Images travel instantly. History does not. Another factor is the enormous international effort to influence how Israel is understood. Qatar deserves particular scrutiny. Over the past several decades, Qatari sources have become the largest foreign source of disclosed gifts and contracts to American universities. The U.S. Department of Education reported more than $1 billion in Qatari funding for 2025 alone. That is over 20% of the total. The scale of the money raises questions about transparency, influence, academic priorities, and whether foreign governments are gaining soft power within the institutions that shape America's future leaders. Qatar also funds Al Jazeera, one of the most influential media organizations in the world, that openly and regularly attacks Israel. Its broadcasts reach hundreds of millions of homes across more than 150 countries and territories. And this is from a country of only 300,000 citizens. Critics argue that its coverage, especially in Arabic, has frequently advanced narratives aligned with Qatar's regional interests, the Muslim Brotherhood, and has contributed to intense hostility toward Israel. So whether one's assessment of Al Jazeera, Qatar clearly understands something that Israel has often been slow to recognize. The information battlefield matters. The narratives matter, the universities matter, media networks, social platforms. Political attitudes formed today can become congressional votes tomorrow. In fact, as we've seen, they have become congressional votes. I'm not suggesting that Qatar alone produced yesterday's result. That would be far too simplistic. American attitudes toward Israel are being shaped by many forces, including what they've seen in Gaza, partisan polarization, changing demographics, campus activism, social media, algorithms, political organizing, foreign influence, and Israel's own communications failures. But ignoring Qatar's investment in global media and American education would also be a mistake. Qatar has spent decades building soft power. Israel must understand that it is fighting two wars simultaneously. One is a military struggle against Hamas, Hezbollah, Iranian regime, and other armed enemies. The other is a global struggle over legitimacy, history, language, and public opinion. Yesterday's House vote suggests that the second struggle may eventually become as strategically important as the first. There is another point that should not be overlooked. The Massey Amendment was not narrowly written to criticize a particular Israeli policy. It sought to eliminate the annual American funding package to Israel in its entirety. That assistance supports Israel's ability to maintain its qualitative military edge in one of the world's most dangerous regions. It reinforces cooperation between the American and Israeli defense industries. It strengthens deterrence against Iran and its proxies. Supporters of the amendment argued that American taxpayers should no longer finance Israeli military operations after the war in Gaza. Some viewed the vote as a protest against Prime Minister Netanyahu's government rather than a rejection of Israel itself. Others want assistance conditioned on changes in Israeli policy. And those arguments do deserve to be heard and debated. But eliminating security assistance entirely affects far more than one government or one war. Israeli governments change. In fact, there's an election this October. Regional threats do not disappear with them. Iran remains hostile. Hezbollah remains dangerous. Hamas remains committed to Israel's destruction. Israel continues to face threats that almost no American ally is expected to confront simultaneously. The amendment failed by more than 3-1. But 20 years ago, more than 100 members voting to eliminate assistance to Israel would have been literally unimaginable. But now it happened. And senior Democratic figures were divided. That tells us that the argument has moved beyond a small group on the political fringe, and we know who all those people are. It is now entering the Democratic mainstream. So what does Congress look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Will future assistance remain bipartisan? Will it become increasingly conditional? Could support for Israel eventually depend almost entirely on which party controls Washington? That would be dangerous for both countries. Israel's greatest strategic asset in Washington has never been one president. Not Donald Trump, not Joe Biden, not any Republican or Democrat. It has been the duality of bipartisan support. Israel cannot afford to become the exclusive cause of one American political party. It must continue strengthening its relationships with Republicans, but it must also rebuild trust with Democrats, with younger Americans, with minority communities, with universities, with journalists, and with civic organizations that increasingly understand the Middle East through a radically different narrative. That does not mean Israel should compromise its security to win favorable headlines. But it does mean that Israel must explain itself more effectively. It must invest in relationships before crises occur. It must tell its history. It must challenge misinformation quickly. And it must treat public diplomacy as a strategic necessity, not as an afterthought. Yesterday's vote was not a legislative defeat for Israel. The amendment failed decisively, but it was a warning. Political coalitions evolve, generations change, narratives harden, and foreign governments that invest patiently in media, education, and influence can shape the environment in which future policy is made, which is exactly what the Qatar regime is doing. For more than 75 years, the American-Israeli relationship has rested on shared democratic values, intelligence cooperation, military partnership, technological innovation, and a common struggle against terrorism. And that relationship remains strong. But the vote of 104 members tells us that its political foundation can no longer be taken for granted. History may not remember this amendment because it failed. History may remember it because of what those 104 votes revealed about where American politics could be heading.
This is Middle East Brief with Avi Kaner. If you want clarity, not noise, follow and share. Continue the conversation on X at Avi Kaner. Back tomorrow.